Okay.
Chief among it's probably Sunset,
Yeah, well,
um,
I
and a
think
lot of other land.
the list came from the insurance company, Vika, or the auditors?
This list was compiled by the auditors based on the information that they received from what we have insured.
Okay. So
But
maybe for their purposes, the auditors weren't that interested, or the insurers weren't interested in the land. I don't know, Jay.
I, I don't know, but it's something if we're taking a look at the assets of the town,
Right.
those are definitively assets and
yeah, I
have
agree.
value.
Yep. So related to that, another question is, I think the list was last updated in 2023. What's the easiest way for us as a committee to add the new assets? Is it to look at the purchases that were made from the reserve accounts the last 2 years?
So this particular list, the way that it is done is in line with the audit. They typically completed when the audit is complete. The audit has not been completed for fiscal year 24, so the asset list is revolved around the fiscal year. And so if this committee wanted to have the list be more current, then we would look at fiscal year 24 and current year, and in terms of the assets that the town acquired. So one example would be the town has paid for and will be acquiring in the spring, but it is the town's 2 new floats. So that would increase the value of the floats. Town vehicle that was just purchased in the fall, that would be an added value. The school just replaced their bus and changed out the bus. That would be another. So there are definitely a few things that that could be included or removed to bring it more current. And I'm happy to sit down with somebody if they want to get a list of a few things. It's not going to be much, but probably the biggest thing is going to be the broadband. That's going to have a big difference from fiscal year 23 to fiscal year 24 in terms of the asset that the town has.
In terms of the specific values, these are accountants' depreciation of original cost. Is that what we're seeing? Or is the residual unamortized value of the initial cost?
Yeah, that's what it looked like to me. They had the initial cost, they set a useful life, depreciation life, and they're depreciating it. What's perhaps a little different is the assets that are listed as 2008.
Yeah,
I'm assuming those are the assets that the town acquired when we became our own town from Cumberland. So I don't know what those values were. Were those the values that were established to set the bond? Maybe you know, Herb.
No clue.
I'm trying to find it and looking through the audit report, trying to find what you're looking at.
This would have been a separate document. It wouldn't have been in the audit report.
Okay, I haven't seen it, so.
Can you share it on the screen, Vika? Or
yeah, I can. Give me a second.
So, okay.
Oh, hold on. So this is the document. Hold on. This is the document.
Yeah, okay. So that's what I put in on the as a reference document when I sent out the agenda.
Yep, this is what you sent out to everybody. And so, what the town received was a non, Excel document in this, and so it lists, the
So for
different.
instance, the stone wharf was inputted at 107,000. Am I reading that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, in 2008. So,
Which is probably just some accounting number at that point, so.
yeah, so I played around with this list quite a bit, and you can maybe see way up at the top. The annual depreciation is 207,000. And so I just did that as a 50,000 foot view to say, if the depreciation were accurate, that would say you need to be putting away whatever that number was, 300,000 a year to replace it. And that doesn't necessarily account for inflation, but just a gut check versus what we're currently putting into the reserve accounts. Now, the reserve accounts cover more than this because we're putting reserves in for new projects like the Stone Pier. So, but I think the list could be broken down. And for example, would it be beneficial to categorize this list by department? Let's say all the town garage equipment,
Yes, it would be
You know,
useful.
Yeah.
categorize it by department: fire truck, school, town garage, coastal waters, whatever we call that.
Well, I
And
think,
it's actually a great history of everything we've bought since 2008. And as a starting point, the depreciation, maybe way the heck off as to when it needs to be replaced. But if you said that's a back of the envelope start to say, okay, here's what we bought for, let's use coastal waters for an example. Here's what we've purchased. Here's what the depreciation would say. Time to replace it. And then coastal waters looks at that. Now, coastal waters is probably not a good example because they probably already have a better capital planning document, but the transfer station doesn't necessarily have one, nor the town garage. So for each department, is it beneficial to create that look? This list would say, here's the equipment that you own. Here's a first cut at replacement dates. What do you think? And do that as part of an annual process by department.
I think that makes sense, John. I think, and also they're the ones best, they're the ones who know what they need. They know the shape that what they have and they need. So if they're going to be looking for replacement costs, they know the questions to ask and, how they want to spec something out. It might be a little different from what we're looking at here, but as you say, a gut check and, the simple depreciation gives you a gut check number. Back to one of your other questions, I think too that we should put asset numbers on them. And as this gets to be a large workable spreadsheet, this sheet here doesn't have a lot of, it's pretty much just populated with numbers and totals. But I think we should have some kind of a way to identify each asset so they're easier to handle.
It certainly makes it easier to talk about if, we're trying to get to a reference line.
from a question with regard to roads and streets, what's the distinction in this town's budgeting process between a capital reinvestment and ongoing maintenance of the roads. Is there a definition of which goes which way, or?
The working definition has been in the past, value of more than $7,500 and a life expectancy of more than 7 years becomes a capital purchase
Okay,
as a guideline.
all right.
But that would be another good example. There's lots of things on that list related to road improvements, etc. And how if we look at those road improvements with their useful life, we've spent X per year every year since a town. That history's there on that list. How does that compare with the current plan that? And what is it called? The Road Commission, or what do we call that? There's a group that works on roads. What's
It's
that
not,
called?
it's not really functional. It was called the Road Plan Committee, and its purpose was to develop a road plan, which we have, but it hasn't been maintained actually since I got off the committee. So
Okay.
not sure where that stands.
Okay.
We had rules of thumb of about, we were only looking at paving. We were not looking at reconstruction or culvert replacement as part of that planning process. Well, we did start looking at culverts. And it was the life expectancy of a paving job we assumed was 20 years, and we had
Right.
a per mile cost, and that's kind of where it ended up. But
Okay.
and there are some roads that never got finished in that 10-year plan, like Chandler's Wharf Road, and where else, Vika? I think the South Road, that main stretch of South Road between Roy Hill and the inn, I think has never been touched.
Yeah, there is, from the inn down to the store, that strip has not been paved. It's still from when Cumberland paved it. And then there are 4 roads that need what's it called?
Chip
The
seal?
Chip
chip
and seal.
seal to be placed on it.
Yeah.
And so the delay has been, there is an several year long process for culvert replacement and a new culvert added, which would require easement agreements from several residents. And so that's just taken far longer than it has to. And so the town has not done the chip seal or the pavement of that due to the fact of really primarily that particular stretch by the store that always gets flooded. Because it was suggested to us, if you're going to do the chip seal to these 4 small roads, it makes sense to do the large project at the same time. It would be more cost effective. And until we have, or if we continue and not having a whole lot of success with doing the easement agreement for that particular section, it'll continue delaying the paving of that last road and then chip sealing of those last 4 roads.
Okay. So I guess I think I heard from the group that it would make sense to stratify this list or group this list by department. And then by department, we see a spending history from 2008 to the present, right now to 2023, but we can try to add what's been purchased in the last 2 years. And then based on the depreciation schedule, we've got a wild ass guess at what future spending might look like by department. And if we can take that picture back to various groups and ask them as part of the annual process to improve that. Does that make sense? And
Yeah, I
then,
think-
I think if we went to coastal waters, if we gave you that list, Herb, you would probably have some substantial updates because you guys have done a lot of work on float repairs and maintenance versus replacement, right?
We do have a document on our webpage, which is called the Marine Infrastructure Plan. And it is a planning document for just that. We've come up with life expectancies for the 16 floats and the 5 gangways and several other pieces of equipment like the harbor master's boat and things like that. So we have and annually in the last few years anyways, we have been giving recommendations to the Board of Selectmen. We have a document out there right now, which is from November for 2004 with our 2025 recommendations for capital spending. And at some point, I'm sure you'll get a hold of that.
Okay.
I think it should be more, I think the goal should be getting it more proactive that way. I think the departments ought to be tasked with, putting in requests and updating their inventory annually.
Well, would it be reasonable to think about a 5-year plan where people articulate what they're gonna need the next 5 years, so we got some forward, advising here?
Sure. Ours simply goes out all the way and then annually we do it. But yeah, we could project out 5 years. I mean,
I'm more asking that of Vika. If we asked that question of the departments, would they have reasonable responses?
I think so. I think the department, if you're looking at departments, I think right now probably fire department, coastal waters, public works, solid waste are all getting in a better situation of having a better knowledge of what the needs are. Departments like public works, they're one vehicle down now, but they've pretty much circulated with fairly new equipment. So I would anticipate and hope that over the next couple of years, they won't need the same level of expenses that maybe solid waste would do. But I think, if you're looking at 3 to 5 years, 5 years, and then more long term, I think that's very reasonable and doable.
Well, ideally then John would have a 2025 or 6, whatever year this is we're dealing with. You could theoretically have 5 years with kind of a roster of what's going to be needed each year. So you got forward advisory.
Yeah. So like I said, I'm willing to take a cut at segregating that list down by department. And so now we got a department list saying what the depreciation schedule, what the history of cost has been, and then looking to the future, what the depreciation schedule says the spending would be over the next 5 years, 10 years, and identify the pieces of equipment that are highlighted by that. And then we're going back to the departments with that to say, help us improve that. And this is part of the annual process, right? And
Yeah.
if everybody's okay with that, I'll get to work on that, and I'll also double back with Vika to add the new equipment, which probably isn't as important to the future spending plan because it's not going to need to be replaced, but it's important to give us an idea of more of our spending history out of the reserve account. We're putting recently we've been putting 550,000 into the reserve account. I don't know what that history is over the since 2008, but how much have we been spending? And I think we're going to need to know down the line somewhere, can we reserve less and free up money for bonding purposes? I don't know. I think that's part of what this group needs to figure out.
I think if you're gonna be looking at that, what I would encourage you is to not necessarily compare the numbers in terms of what has been put in versus what has been taken out. Because I think, there's, in a couple of years that I've been, part of the budget, there's been some years where you're actively putting more money in a certain department to, get to something, and then that slows down. And then, so for example, a couple of years ago, there was, 2 years in a row where significantly more money was going into the public works equipment department, because that money was being set aside to buy a new tractor. Once that tractor was bought, less money was going into that department, and then more money, was being allocated to another department. And so what that money was going for, I think is important to recognize. And as far as the bonding, unfortunately has gotten more expensive than I think it's ever been for municipalities. And, it's, paying 5.5%, 6% interest is a large sum of cash when you add, several $100,000 in bonding that we pay out. We pay a lot of interest now.
Right.
And in some of them, it's taking out a $250,000 bond and paying it over 6 years and having the interest be a staggering amount. Is that worth it? And so I think with a couple of the bonds that, the town has taken out in a couple of years, I don't think it's been the most cost effective, bond, because those interest rates ended up being very high. And so as a result, we're paying a lot in interest for that.
Yep.
John, I'd be happy to help you with that too. And Vika, that makes me think, and again, I don't know anything about how this works, but looking at opportunity cost of capital, what does the town earn if it's got money, sitting in an account? What do they get?
The money in the reserve accounts?
Yeah. So what do we earn
So
for it?
historically, to my knowledge, nothing has been done to it. It would just kind of acquire a small percentage in interest. And so, up until recently, there was only about 1% interest or so that it was acquiring. And I had
Okay.
reached out to the bank and asked them, if we could increase the interest in any way, or if there was other ways that we can invest. And without even a question, they bumped us up to 3.5%, 4%. So we are, collecting right
Good.
now, almost $7,000 in interest on the money that we have sitting versus the $1,200 that we were collecting, just by simply asking the question if the interest rate could be increased.
Yeah, they love to do that. They say, "Oh, why didn't you ask?" Yeah.
Well, a
you
related
tell us?
question to that, is there a policy for how much money is held in any given account or any given bank? I mean, for instance, nonprofits that I'm on the board of require that all the money be insured, which means you have a $250,000 maximum you can have in any one bank. Is there a policy that the town has with regard to that?
There's no specific policy relative to that, unless Herb knows of one that I'm not aware of. And what we do have right now is we have all of our reserve accounts are through Machias Savings Bank, and they're all split up by each individual reserve account. And so every month we receive a statement as far as what the balance is for that reserve account and what the interest collected.
It might be useful to know if each account is separately insured or if they collectively are facing the 250,000 ceiling.
It depends on how they structured the accounts.
Right, and I don't know, I'm just posing the question because.
Yeah, in one of our meetings, probably next meeting, we'll look at the list of reserve accounts, and you'll see the starting balances and the interest in the current balances. And
Yeah, this is maybe not the scope of this committee. I'm just pretty sensitive about cash suddenly disappearing when somebody goes bankrupt. Not
Mhm.
saying the Chias is gonna go bankrupt, but just a question of prudence here.
I do think it's the scope of the committee make a recommendation to the Board of Selectmen that we recognize the FDIC limitations and
Yeah,
work within them.
I agree.
It'll be useful to know if the accounts are separately insured or collectively insured. That's because I
I
know
can find that out from a simple email to our bank rep.
that would be great. Just
Super.
start off with, when you go bankrupt, how much insurance will be?
A little blunt there, Jim.
I guess before we move on from the asset list and what we're going to do with it, I think the fire department also has a pretty good plan, or has a plan laid out for the replacement of fire trucks. And I saw that I think I saw that in what you put on our shared folder, Vika. I looked for it
Yeah.
today, I couldn't find it, but I'll go back to that too and compare that to what the depreciation schedule says for their equipment.
Yeah, you gotta assume that the requests are gonna exceed the depreciation because the depreciation is based on old pricing, so.
Right.
Correct. Yeah. So we need to, if we're going to use the depreciation as a replacement plan, we'd have to use some factor to figure out what the replacement price is, 4% inflation or 5 or whatever it might be, which could be way off in the case of fire trucks or
And especially
floats. Who knows?
something that was entered into the schedule in 2008.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, I can tell you that the fire truck replacement strategy at one time we looked at it, I think they have 5 major vehicles, and the replacement cost was about $250,000 plus or minus, depending on which vehicle you're replacing. And we just simply projected out a lifespan of 30 years for a fire truck, because they can last that long because they don't get a lot of mileage. And we were replacing a fire truck every 5 years, and you take the $250,000 and divide it by 5, that's your annual contribution. That's kind of the way we did it at one point. And of course, then our fire truck broke down, and there goes the plan. We had to do it 2 years.
And an ambulance broke down, and then we had to take out a bank loan to buy one. Right now, as far as, fire truck, we have been consistently setting aside, at least for the last 3 years, $50,000, with the plan that over the next, 7 years, the truck that needs to be replaced will be replaced. The challenge that we're running into with that is the truck that needs to be replaced with the new trucks that it's going to be replaced, it's going to be too big to fit in the existing building. So those are the kind of, hiccups that we're having to deal with, because now the building that we have to house the vehicles are being made bigger than the space that we have to fit them in. So, and then you add an addition, and it turns into building a new building is cheaper than adding an addition. So.
Yep.
So that turns $250,000 into $5 or $6 million.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Okay. The next item on our agenda was talking about the benefit of creating a status report for tracking all the approved new capital projects. And I started out to list all the ones that I potentially knew about, and Carol added some when the draft agenda went out. So on that list of, let's say, new work or in-process capital projects, we've got buy the solar array. We've got the Stone Pier project, Cousins Island Wharf, Wharf Road parking, barging, and maybe that's Bennett's Cove barging, or maybe it's more. South Shore Drive, new public safety building, town office renovation. And what are accepted projects? I think somewhere in our charge, we were supposed to look at track accepted projects. I don't know where I got that language, but anyway, are we missing any big projects that are being discussed or are going to have to be done if from that list?
I don't know.
The solar project, basically, we have enough money set aside already to pay for that.
Yeah, and I was at a select board meeting, and I think Chip was there too. It was when they the first draft of the budget was talked about. The solar array came up, and apparently last year, some group looked at. We don't have to buy it. We can continue in the current status, and I guess last year the decision was made not to buy it, or it was like, well, we're not sure, and it's not a big deal one way or the other, so nothing happened. So that's something that perhaps we need to look at again.
Yeah.
And do you have that report, Vika, or whatever analysis was done last year?
I can get it to you. Last year, so originally when the town signed up for this, it was on a seven-year plan, I believe it was, and the goal was to buy it out after 7 years. And so X amount of money has been getting set aside annually into the solar array purchase reserve account specifically for that. Last year, a representative from Revision Energy approached us and suggested that we can buy it out then. At that point, the climate action team looked at it and made the recommendation to not follow through with the buyout. In addition to that, the town didn't have enough money in the reserve account to do it because they were also on a plan to buy it out this year. Now there are some questions being raised by a couple of select board members, and then climate action team had raised it as all. And also is we can continue more or less renting the equipment is really rather than owning it, where then certain expenses don't fall onto the town and or buy it out. So there is the money to buy it out, but the town really should look into it and decide whether they want to buy it out and own that, or if they want to keep doing what they've been doing. If it gets bought out, then the cash is there. If it doesn't get bought out, then that money would need to be reallocated by the taxpayers to another fund or to use for something else. But I can put in the folder any information that I had received last year relative to the solar array, and then any information that I can get that climate action team had. So then that way you can have more reading to do.
You probably want to give them a copy of the power purchase agreement.
Okay.
You really want to increase the reading, don't you?
I had to read it. You guys should have to read it.
I read it too.
I know you did. Read it again.
Tell me what it says.
You should be able
I
to
believe
fill
you.
everybody in, Jane.
Basically, it's from this point on, because we have enough money to buy it, if we so decided, we should stop putting money in because we don't need to. Because the price of it goes down year by year. And I think that the issue essentially is if we own it, then we're responsible for it. And that means maintaining it. And I don't think that we have a lot of people in our employ that are prepared to try and maintain this, the solar array. Maybe they could be trained or whatever, but, and the other thing is you don't know what the cost of the things, the panels, as much as they claim will last almost forever, is not, clearly not the case. They do last a long time, but it's the other parts of it.
It's the
that
inverters,
fail.
the inverters.
Yeah. And I'm not sure what inverters cost, but having somebody able to say, okay, the problem's the inverter, let's order 2 more and what that costs and so forth. So,
Sounds like a big project to analyze it. Yeah.
well, anything that we own as a business, we're responsible for, and if we don't maintain it and take care of it,
Sure.
we've just thrown the money away.
Yep.
So,
Basically, I could summarize the power purchase agreement. It's a 20-year agreement. We had a buyout option at 6 years, at something like $75,000 or $80,000. So we put enough money away to do that. If you take that money and project it out, it's about 7 more years before we start getting free power. And then whatever the difference is between 14 years and 20 years, theoretically, we are getting free power. A lot of the reason this went through in the first place was that people wanted to do something green. And
Yeah.
if we just look at the numbers and look at the power purchase agreement, I think it's a static cost per kilowatt hour in the power purchase agreement for the length of it. Just look at that with current prices and anticipated prices going forward. It's not rocket science to analyze it, but that's kind of the thought process I think that has to go into it. And there certainly are companies who could, review that power purchase agreement for you and make a recommendation.
The biggest cost that the town has relative to electricity are the streetlights, and the
They're not in-
streetlights aren't part of that.
Right.
And you look at, the last couple of years, what we've spent, there has not, we haven't seen a big difference in cost savings to date, really. So definitely
Okay.
worth looking into it, whether buying it out is a good option or just kind of sticking to what is
So
still
we ought to get the
happening.
documents and figure out where we're going with that. I don't know that we missed any big projects, and so I think based on our charge, it says track the status of accepted capital projects. So that's where the accepted word came from. Is the Stone Pier an accepted project? I would say, yeah, the community's voted on it and it's being worked on and money's being spent on it. Maybe there are some on this list that aren't in that same status. Public safety building, I know work's been done on it. I don't know whether that's just conceptual, and we probably spent some money, but is that an accepted capital project? I don't know. But I think all the potential big spending projects, as part of an annual plan, we ought to at least provide an overview of what the scope of the project is, what the objective of the project is, what the current status is, that money's being spent on engineering, how much money has been spent to date. So if we focused on the Stone Pier, what's the objective? What's the scope of the Stone Pier project? What's the status? And maybe that's we're getting ready to get a 30% estimate of cost or whatever. I don't know where we stand with GEI on stone pier design or whatever. How much have we spent? How much do we have in the reserve account? But then to me, the important part is that this is going to be a wild and wide open thing. What's the cost, potential cost of the project? And what assumptions do we have around grants? And then if we do it in a certain time, we make some assumption about timing, how much are we going to have to bond? And what impact does that have on the town budget? And can we afford it? So I see getting our arms around all these projects as much as we can. And there's going to be lots of, ability to say, well, no, we're not going to do that in 3 years. We're going to do that in 5 years. Or, we're not going to have to borrow $2 million. We're going to have to borrow 1 million, or we're going to have to borrow 4, but somehow lay out as simply as we can to the select board and the community that, here's our capital appetite in the stuff that's replacement, in the stuff that's new, and paint the picture of what it's going to cost and what we can afford, given a 5% tax increase annually, or whatever assumptions we want to make around that. And I think it'll require a lot of dialogue back and forth with the select board, or at least some input at some point in time.
I agree, John. I think it's a great idea, the visibility of those things, and some just periodic statements that have been made over things that I've listened to or attended, and people are wondering, hey, there's somebody talking about the stone pier. We did this, we did, we never get anywhere. We never do anything. So I think it is good to develop some sort of recent history of it and how much is being spent, because that doesn't necessarily get captured, I don't think, when we look at the numbers at town meeting and so forth. We're asked to vote on new appropriations, or if it's new for the town, for the stone pier, but what has it been? So I think it's good to have that history. And
Are we in a position to do something similar for all the other projects? Do we have knowledge of cost estimates?
I go to some small percentage of the selectmen's meetings, but I go here and there, and or hear things in the town. And for example, I don't know the answer to your question, Jim, but South Shore Drive, maybe the best number we have right now is a $2 million estimate that the residents got from an engineering firm, right? I'm throwing that out, but 4. Okay, Vika's saying 4. So, I think that's a great example. We somehow need to characterize for our own group and for the community, what that project is and what the current status is and what's being done and what it might cost.
And in the case of that one, because I don't know the particulars, but how much is maintaining the obligation the town has to provide access to those property owners, and how much is a road improvement? Do we know?
So we don't. So with that particular project, I think it's an example of something that really got dropped at the town without having anything set aside or any kind of money to prepare for such an expense. That particular project, so in 2020, some erosion took place and residents came to us, and they were concerned that the erosion was getting close to the road. In the process, what the town discovered was that the town road went through private property, and that the damage where it had happened was on private property. So the town had no obligation, but no ability to do anything about it. So then you fast forward to last winter, the storms had such a significant damage that it started really infringing upon the town property. So the first thing the town did was get a survey, which took several months because all surveyors we have one company that comes out here. In the process, we've been working with FEMA to try to figure out what the cost estimates about would be relative to reimbursement. At the same time, we had residents who were very active and patient, trying to help out on their own. And we were in close contact with them. And one of the residents was able to have connections to a coastal engineering firm. A rough estimate was given to $4 million to restabilize the entire embankment. The town does not have the kind of money. And even if the town were to bond $4 million right now, that would be a significant increase to taxpayers to provide access to a dozen homes. And is that a cost-effective way to provide that access? And so the town was ultimately able to figure out from the from FEMA that they estimate a little over $800,000 in damages that would be reimbursable. So then we had a general idea of some costs that we could work with, knowing the money that we would return back. And so at that point, the town proceeded to hire a coastal engineer to do a feasibility study to help the town determine what are options short term within the next 6 months to a year, and what are our options long term. We had met with the residents a couple months ago, and long-term solution was suggested to move the road behind the houses. And there was a lot of discussion around, are you going to cap our property taxes so they don't go up? So there's a lot of individual concerns in that area for the benefit of their protection. And it's hard for those residents to look at the overall impact that it's going to have on every taxpayer. And so where it stands currently is we still unfortunately really don't have a lot of answers to the residents there. Thankfully, we haven't had any major storms to cause further damage. Our fire department feels safe to go down there in case of an emergency. Our plow trucks feel safe to go down there in case if they need to plow. We are just starting the process. We have our first meeting next week with GEI to start on the feasibility study. So hopefully within the next 2 to 4 months, we will be able to have a better idea of what the options could be based on the professional recommendation, and then what some of those cost estimates are. And then a hard decision could be made of, could there be short-term repair done and then move to long-term solutions, or what the steps are. And that's kind of, in a nutshell, that particular area and what we've been dealing with. Something that's very unexpected, something that the town hasn't even considered or even looked at up until just, recently.
And is there a clear sense of what the town's obligation is to these properties? This is more of a legal question, I guess. But
It is a legal question. It is a town right away. The town's obligation is to provide access to their homes.
okay.
And that, I think at this point, the town and the board is just trying to figure out what the best way that is to do for the residents. But then what is the best way it is to have an overall impact on all the taxpayers today and down the line. Also being well aware that this is just one tiny little big cost ticket item, and furthermore, why we weren't I wasn't supportive of it, and I think I can speak for the board. They weren't ready to just commit to, you know, a $4 million bond, go ask taxpayers for money and proceed with the fixes. It's just, it's not doable. It's not realistic.
Just one thought along these lines is that we should probably, we've got a list of current projects that we're aware of, but the question is how do you get on the project list? And I know that there are some criteria. Herb mentioned a couple of them: 7 years duration, $7,000 capital cost. Further, they have to comply with the town's general plans, and so forth. But we should redefine that, or better define, I think, as to how you actually get on the list. Aside from the fact that the selectmen are going to want to make the choice, but there should be criteria by which you get on that list.
And John, if I may, the list that you have, you divided into projects, defined accepted, and then other. And the way I've always thought of these as kind of one-off projects that you may also incur ongoing maintenance for. But then what you've got under other is mostly like maintenance, like regular kind of predictable maintenance that you want to plan for. Big maintenance projects like replacing a roof or replacing a furnace or repaving a road or buying a vehicle. A couple, so just in terms of categorizing those, you may want to think of it, they may be different, the way you think about those things, the way you track them.
Right.
And you know, some are by default always going to be on the list that are ongoing projects, and some of them are going to come on and go off, like Jay was just talking about. The two items that I sort of thought about that may or may not, depending on what your criteria is for the list, is certainly the marine infrastructure that Coastal Waters does. There's about well, just floats and values. We use a number of something like $61 per square foot. And when you add up all the square footage, it's about $250,000 worth of floats that we have in the 16 floats. And there's gangways and, you know, associated stuff that probably adds another 20% to that or something. So there's a fair amount there. And that may be a separate sort of ongoing thing under your other category, which is just marine infrastructure. Especially since we're an island, I think we should think about that separately. We should think about that uniquely, and in terms of prioritizing it, you know, it may have different structure of prioritization. And then the other one I thought of, and I don't know where we're at. Maybe Vika has some more knowledge, but I know there's been discussion about improvements at the solid waste facility, particularly to get rid of the organic waste, the stump dump. We spend, I don't know, what are we spending now? 40 grand a year or something, 30 grand a year or something on that, to get that chipped and just sit there. We're not going to have room to do that forever. It's a fire hazard. You know, that stuff can, if it's piled too high, can spontaneously combust. And create kind of underground fires. You can ask the paper companies about that. So I think there may be some things there. There's also some regular, you know, lifespans of like the compactors. We have 4 compactors, 3 compactors, I mean, and the life expectancy of those. And I believe we own the containers that things are pulled off on. Is that true, Vika, or do we not own those? The containers that stuff is hauled away on. Those, I think we're responsible for replacing those, aren't we?
We're responsible for replacing the compactors. The containers, I'm not sure that we own the containers. I think the containers is something that we get charged with in the transport fee, with
Okay.
the transfer.
So the solid waste stuff may or may not fall separately onto your list, or maybe fall under that. But there has been talk about some other way to deal with the chips. Maybe take them off the island. But it's still going to be a significant cost every year. And they even looked at an incinerator to burn them. I don't know where that suggestion stands, but
Climate action team is still, Aldrich is, the leading man behind it, but they're still, trying to look more into whether burning the chips or investing in some kind of piece of equipment to allow that is, a possibility. There has been a suggestion in the past to turn it into, heat and fuel or whatnot. I think a short-term solution, which I haven't received the final numbers for it, and I know some people might not be thrilled with the idea, but the most immediate cost-effective way that we might be able to get rid of some of this stuff until at least we can contain it better is to barge it off on a regular basis. So Shebig is the only town in Casco Bay that does not barge off its brush and its stumps. And so we did a couple of trial runs with Lionel where they just charged us for prorated barge costs and not for the cost of the actual material or getting it to a facility. But for next fiscal year, there very well might be a recommendation from me to the board to spend a year trying to get rid of it on a regular basis. That obviously creates more barge trips and added cost to the barging. But you know, if that's the only way that we can eliminate sparking a town-wide fire, then that might be, you know, the cost that we kind of pay to offset that. But yeah, that's another thing that most people don't think about. That, and the worst part is we don't collect any revenue for that area, which I think people are realizing is something that is not an effective way of running a municipality.
okay, so maybe that's an operational cost and maybe out of the scope of what we're talking about here, but the marine infrastructure might make sense to put on there separately.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So
The compactors, I think, and there is a reserve account specifically for compactors. And we had a couple of years ago, Bo recommended putting $1,000 a year into it. We got lucky because this past year, one of the compactors, there was a piece of equipment that really needed to be replaced. And we had some money in the reserve account, and then that allowed the board to really realize and decide that maybe $1,000 a year, until there is enough built up in the reserve account to cover the cost of, you know, one or two of them, is a better way to put. So there is, I believe at this point, there's $10,000 in that account. So then if we have to replace one or two pieces, we have it. But a compactor itself is like a $15,000 replacement.
So where my mind's at is I think we have a pretty good list of, let's say, accepted or big projects that might be in front of us. I think Herb's point that thinking about how we characterize these projects and separate them in what's our ultimate, you know, what's the ongoing maintained capital plan look like makes a lot of sense, because you're thinking about projects differently. Like a roof replacement is different than this Stone Wharf project. To me, it makes sense to take a couple of these projects and create a template for what goes in the report. What's our project description? You know, what would we say about the stone pier? What's the project overview? What's the current status? What are the key milestones that are coming up? What are the anticipated costs and the timing of those costs? But do one or two and get comfortable as a group that that's a format that makes sense, and then do the other ones. That seem reasonable? If Carol were here, I were going to ask her if she would take a crack at doing like the stone pier as an example. And that doesn't mean we can't ask her to do that.
No, I think it makes a lot
starting
of.
with, go ahead,
Go ahead,
Jim.
Jim. No, go ahead. That's fine.
Okay, I think starting with the stone pier makes the most sense. It's likely the biggest, the most complicated. Everything else will be simpler once we figure out that template.
Yep. Okay.
I think that's true, John, what you say, and if you listen to the way the information is collected and assimilated, there are stories. There are just stories about this, and so a spreadsheet can't really capture those, and so that we need some kind of a form that, in this instance, like in this meeting, we've got spreadsheet numbers, but Vika is filling in all the stories behind them, and that's what I think people need to know, is they know what's going on. So I do agree that a template beyond just a simple spreadsheet for a particular item, we need to capture that.
Okay.
I help you.
Anybody want to take a crack at that, or what the starting template looks like? You probably have one in your bag of tricks, Jim, from all your professional work.
The answer to that is perhaps, but I also know the least about the stone pier of anyone who's.
Oh, I'm just saying, what's the template? I'm not asking you to fill it out.
Well, but just for instance, on the stone pier, the first issue is, for what period in the future are we building? Do we know that? And we know sea rise is coming.
I think it depends on how high the pier, how high we
I
depend.
know,
But are we building 20 years or 50? I don't know.
well,
But that's part of the project work.
That to me is the crucial question to start off.
Well,
What is the project? You know,
if
I don't know. I mean, I'd be happy to participate with someone else in doing this, but in the next few weeks, I'm really swamped with some other stuff right now. But my bigger is the ignorance of exactly where it stands is my biggest hole on this.
if you started, Jim, or we adopt a practice of starting a document, if it lives on the shared drive that is the town's, like Vika has put those in, people can go in. You could start it, put in the questions that come up to you, and every one of us could visit it and put in suggestions, questions, or whatever. So it would be kind of a working document. It's not, all the questions up to you, or
The next 2 weeks, I have no time. I'm just
Yeah.
telling you that. So if you want it in 2 weeks, I'm not going to be available to do that. If it's after 2 weeks, I can try.
well,
Well, I'll try to take a cut at it. It's short of 2 weeks. I have some time. It's a quiet time of year around here.
and I'm happy to help out with it too. As I say, you start a template, and then we go in and put in some questions, and we, and get it working and get everybody thinking about it.
Okay.
And is this particular in the critical path for what we have to deliver? And we're going to get into that later, I guess, is what we're supposed to deliver for town meeting.
Well, let's look at the Vika. If you could bring up there's a 1-page Excel spreadsheet, might say new capital capacity. Um,
Well, let me ask you a question. Seriously, has there been a decision made of what the scope of this work is on the stone pier? I mean, is it to build, is the engineer been told design something that gets you to, 2075, or is it to 2050, What is the engineer been told?
I think there's work being done on that right now, isn't there, Vika, to get the 30% design?
But of what is what I'm saying?
Yeah, so up until recently, when it comes to Stone Wharf, there's been kind of this assumption that it was all going to be done at the same time. And in finding that out, the numbers that were being thrown out at the town were $15-18 million. And so that forced the board to pause and take a step back and look to see how it could be done in phases. And so the first phase is really looking at something that could be done within the next, hopefully 5 years, probably maybe closer to 10, but 5 years. And then, 10 to 20 year mark with the work that's being done. The initial conversations were, to accommodate the 75 year with the highest tides and things like that. Now it's stepping back and really looking at how high can the pier be raised to accommodate everyday high tides and the occasional storms. But if we have those super intense storms where, they're significantly higher than your average high tide on a very rare case, do we need to be several feet above water during storms like that? So all of those questions are now being raised and being discussed because going from 0 feet to 8 feet raising the stone pier really brings it into a very drastically different price cost than if we were to raise the stone pier by 2 to 4 feet and then work it into a phase system where over the next few years something gets done to focus on this, and then after that it gets, the next phase, it works to raise it and make it a little bit better. And so the answer to that question isn't fully there, but the goal is to spend the next several months working with GEI, getting to that 30% design where there is a better understanding and more concrete number of how much the stone pier will be raised, what it's going to accommodate, and so forth, because all of that also plays a critical role in applying for any grants and the expectation that we are being adaptable to sea level rise and coastal erosion and all of these storms. And if we're not taking those into considerations, we're limiting ourselves to the possibilities of the grants we might have available.
So from the point of view of the program John's been laying out, is it maybe the appropriate scale at this point is to define what's necessary to do the engineering over the next 2 to 3 years, because there's no construction going to start probably for 2 or 3 years, but there's a lot of investment that has to be made to get to the point where you could then know what you're building. I mean, that, because I think by April, we're not going to know anything more than Vicky just tossed out. I mean, it's
There is ongoing work, and I know that Carol, my wife, is working on some design criteria, or at least I don't know if she's working with anybody, and I don't know what it is, but the design criteria would be for a 30% design, 30% engineering design, and the reason that is a milestone is because that's what gets you to figure out what kind of funding you can have available to you, that 30%.
also gets you pretty much better construction numbers at that point. So
Right. So that's the goal right now. That's what they're working on right now. So if you talk to Carol, you could probably get some harder numbers than anybody here is willing to say in terms of like, what's the build to, the elevation. But I know, I know there's work done, so maybe by April, there will be more information is
There,
what
I
I'm
think by
suggesting.
April, there should be more information. We are now, just like we are with South Shore Drive, are in the process of coming up with a scope of work with GEI on what that work with them is going to be for the 30% design. And the select board made the decision to really focus on working on all of these different projects with one engineering firm that is local and has a lot of expertise, but also being more aware of what's in the contracts and making sure that they receive the information that they're looking for, and they have more leverage and leeway in being able to get that information at an appropriate time frame, because those are some of the challenges that we've experienced in the past, being a very small municipality, more or less, smaller projects than billion-dollar projects in Boston and places like that. And so there's a lot more work that the board is putting up front in kind of negotiating with this engineering firm and making sure that the scope of work and the language that's laid out within it is very concrete, that then the board has, something behind them to be able to step their foot down and get this 30% design within the time frame that will be committed when the contract is signed.
Well, then, John, my question would be, would a different project be a better template right now?
I don't think so, because, Stone Pier is,
It's the
to,
big,
to
it's the
speak to
big
your point,
elephant.
where, can we somehow in my mind, the best service we can provide to the select board and the community is to improve our understanding of capital costs that are coming at the town. And there's the capital cost that's associated with all the assets we currently have that are going to be replaced, have to be replaced. There's the new projects, there's however we categorize them. And I personally would like to know what our capacity is. How much money can we spend on the Stone Pier? Can we even think about doing a new town office? How do we get through the possible major expense of South Shore Drive? I don't know. But so back to the Stone Pier example, if we're not going to build anything for 5 years, fine. What are we going to spend for money in the next 5 years on design and permitting or whatever? But then 5 years out, what do we think the town's going to have to pony up? We got to make some assumption, that the project's going to cost between 5 million and 20 million, and the town's going to have to put up 10% or 20%. And so a 5-year point, how much are we going to have to put into the annual budget, and what's that look like? Is that doable?
Well,
If I read what you were saying, John, we're discussing particulars of the Stone Pier right now, but really going back, you were trying to develop a template for collecting information for any of these projects.
Right.
So
right.
That's where I think certainly with Jim, I'm not trying to dump this on you, Jim, but I mean so what types of questions for any project that you look at do we need to have? And I think that's where a common document where people can say, these are the kind of questions, we're not talking about a specific one, but just to populate the document with, these are the questions I would ask. And start, and then we start to fill them in with details and stories and stuff. But if at least we can collect and itemize all these items.
well, I'd be happy to participate with one of the rest of you taking the lead.
Okay.
That template, but I'm just pointing out that you need to know something before you know if it's a useful template.
Well, yeah. Well, kind of, you know, you see the information we're starting with and it's, you know,
Not
it's,
to envision the template, you don't need to know anything. You need to have the right questions, right?
yeah,
Okay.
Or
goes
So if
somewhere.
you're taking the lead on this, John, I'll help you over the next week or
we-
so.
And I'm happy to help too. And I do have a question to anyone out there. It kind of, when we have one of the things like in an Excel spreadsheet, have you guys used comments when you do in the review stage of a comment, either in a Word document or in an Excel spreadsheet, so that let's say there's an individual cell that wants to be discussed, and so that people can leave a comment? Have you guys ever done that?
I don't, but
Okay, Jay?
That's above my skill level.
Yeah, well, I've had, you might tell that I hear that a lot, but the reason that I do is because I've used, you know, the collaborative documents. It's very, very simple. I'd be happy to show anyone, and I think if people learned how to use it, it would save lots of time in the end. So I'd be happy to kind of take the lead. And if you just give it a shot and try it, I think what it would do is, you know, let's see how this these ideas, but anyway, I won't take up a lot of time with that.
so I actually meant at the beginning of the meeting to say, how long should we let these meetings run? Are you guys want to call it after an hour and a half, or you're okay with 2 hours or whatever? Because
well, do we have anything else to talk about at this meeting?
we do today, sure.
What else?
Well, didn't you look at the agenda?
I did, but I don't remember it all.
Vika, can you bring up there was a one-page Excel spreadsheet that was attached. And I'm kind of coming full circle to how in my mind this plays out. So that's it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So part of this was, you know, I think we all saw the Pownell very integrated, detailed process for tracking capital projects and making decisions about what gets bonded, et cetera. And I like that kind of stuff. When I looked at the Pownell thing, I thought, well, I don't know that we're ready to go there yet. And for less investment in time, can we get, you know, the back of the envelope or the big picture look? So this spreadsheet was intended to look at how much new capital capacity do we have in any given year. So the top line is capital reserve account additions. And I think the actual number for 2025 is 552 or something. You see the 561 up there. And I just put 3% inflation in that. And then I put in our current bond debt payments. And that was from the payment schedules that Vika put in the shared file.
Yep.
Then I subtracted out, so that's the total, and I subtracted out broadband under the belief that broadband is going to get paid for by Axiom. Okay, so this is bond debt payments minus the Axiom dollars. And you can see in 2027, we lose the 2008 bond, which was the big bond for when we became a town. So we begin to pick up capacity then. So then total capital spending was the reserve account plus the bond payment, not including the broadband. And then our total expenditure budget as a town, I highlighted that 4 million because I didn't have the number in front of me. I think last year, I think in 2025, it's 4 million too. So those numbers need to be changed. But looking at where we are in 2024, 2025, capital expenditures are 23% of our budget. So I don't know whether that's a good number or not, but if you assume that taxes would stay fairly controllable if our capital budget stayed at 23% of our total, then how much additional capacity do we have for capital? And that's the bottom line there, available additional to spend. So I guess I'm personally thinking
it's
hung
useful.
up, and this isn't necessarily where we're going, but
I think it's useful, but the next decision is, and that'll depend a lot on what interest rates are for bonds at that point. But do you use that capacity to bond a large number to pay for some big item? Or do you increase what you're contributing to capital reserves so that you can build up your ability to handle a series of smaller items? And that's sort of a question.
yeah, and I don't know the answer to that. And then back to that top line where I've inflated it by 3% per year.
Right.
That might be totally wrong for a couple of reasons. One, we're currently generating 3% interest on what's in the account. So maybe we don't need as much inflation protection. But also some of those capital reserve accounts are for standalone projects. Like we're putting money in there now for the Stone Pier. So at some point in time, that contribution goes away, let's say, when we bond the project.
Well, I mean, like Vika said, there's a lot of questions. Is this, are we looking for grant money? How much grant money? All those assumptions, so.
Right. But in my mind, all we can do is
It might be useful to think about alternative models within this. To say, if the here's a couple of ifs. If the Stone Pier costs $10 million, and if that's half grant money, and if you're buying 25 years with the Stone Pier with that expenditure, do you then justify a 25-year bond because you're building 25 years of useful life? I mean, that becomes at least a scenario that could be played out. But you could look at it alternately and with other scenarios.
Carol had done that when a couple of years ago when we received the drawings and we were working with Weston and Sampson, and then they gave us, the estimate of 10 or 15 million, something like that. Carol had done that math, very similar to what Jim, you were just talking about. And her prediction, and she can elaborate more, the next time she's available, is I believe, if my memory is right, it was adding nearly $1 million to the annual budget.
Yep.
To be able to take on that debt. And that obviously, that's a quarter of the entire budget right now. So is that something that is feasible or not? So.
Right.
About what is a bond when we do bonds? What are they going for now?
So it really depends. We have not gotten a bond in the last 2 years, but the bonds that we have now, and I sent you in The folder, there is a bond folder in there. If you look in it, you'll see
Yep.
all the different percentages. They
Okay.
vary depending year to year. And so there are some bonds that we have that are in the 4%, some in the 2%, some in the 5%. So it really just depends what, you know, what everything else is like. And historically, the main bond banks have been pretty good and pretty low, but the last couple of years, they're really no different than going and taking out a loan.
Yeah.
I think you can click the spreadsheet off, Vika. Yeah, so my intent was just to, you know, how do we present this back to the selectmen and the community at some point in time? You know, and I don't think you do it with a spreadsheet,
Oh,
but you know, how do we get our arms around what the picture is and the options, and you know, and then it becomes recommendations.
I'd say from my experience, a written description precedes the numbers because it articulates all the assumptions you're operating on. And summary numbers are dangerous, like because there's so many assumptions buried in them until people really understand the individual components. So, for instance, the whole piece you've done to this point, John, of aggregate, and we'll go further with, to aggregate what current capital replacement is and how the town's paying for it, is a pretty important piece of education before you start adding new things in, I think. So being able to say every year we need to spend whatever it is,
Right.
$900,000 to maintain the current plant, and here's all the things involved with that, and here's how we've done it in the past, is a critical background piece of information before you then say, and what does it mean in the future? So you got to be
Yeah, I agree with that.
cautious how much, in what basis we start trying to educate people. I mean, it's just critical. A big dump almost always gets you in trouble, in my experience. So,
But I think we could get to the point quite quickly. 50,000 back foot view, back of the envelope,
Yeah.
whatever you want to call it. That we know there's some number that needs to be put into capital reserve every year.
oh yeah, I mean, I think
And we know what our current bond situation is, and how much are we willing to increase the taxes? And
well, but let me make another point with this. Simply observing that at current tax rates, there's the capacity to start raising capital reserves by $250,000 4 years out. Could simply, I don't know what the legal requirements are in Maine, but could simply become an account that begins to be a contributor toward paying part of a bond bill or bond cost if you later decide to bond on things. So for instance, if you put aside, let's say, $750,000 for 3 years, and then you float a bond that's got, you know, an $800,000 payment, you could perhaps pay 10% of that bond out of just drawing down your reserve account so that you're not having to utilize current year money to pay the full bond. I mean, there's those kind of manipulations that can be done. And I guess as an example, private example, we rebuilt the HVAC system in this building over the last few years. It cost us $30 million. This is my condo building. So we started putting in a capital reserve 7 years ago, which is now used to help pay down the loan we had to take to build the $30 million in the building. And so there's ways to fold that together into, and I'm sure there's people that know this much better than me in your financial advisors who can articulate this, but there are all those options in these approaches. So I didn't mean to scare you with our 30 million.
No, my wanted is
Think-
kind of a
Think
question.
two-
A
think
question
two
for
stone-
Herb and Jay and Vika. My sense would be that how much money got put into the reserve accounts was to some degree backed into. Yeah, we know we wanted to put 50,000 in for the fire truck, or we wanted to put in so much for the stone pier. But then if with a reasonable tax increase, there was another $25,000 or $75,000 available, wouldn't the selectmen have built the reserve fund up?
They've done that in the last couple of years.
How much is going into the stone pier every year right now, the reserve for that?
So it's varied the last couple of years, but I believe last year it was $175,000 that went in.
Right,
There's there is almost $700,000 just in that reserve account at the moment.
but you're gonna use some of that for the engineering, I assume.
The money that we are using for the current phase is mostly done through a grant.
Oh,
So the engineering work that we did last time was, we had a $75,000 grant that was used, and so we just had to do I believe it was 25% match, and so this time around it's similar, and so utilizing grant money that's available, we're able to get a lot more for our bucks. So we're getting $100,000 worth of services for $25,000.
keep doing that, it'll be great.
Well, it's getting really hard to keep track of all the grants.
Well, you need
We've
more
got Herb
zeros,
helping us
you need more
organize
zeros
them.
on your spreadsheet, so anyhow, okay. Yeah, but, so I guess what I'm saying, John, is that laying out one scenario is probably not wise, but saying there are alternative scenarios and what the magnitude of need is likely to be is the first thing to communicate to people. That'd be my recommendation to you.
Okay, so the next thing on our agenda was, do we have clarity on what a capital plan looks like? For the last 2 or 3 weeks, I rolled around in my mind, what's a capital plan look like? But that's why I put our duties and a capital plan. This is what we got from the selectmen,
Right.
and it's pretty clear. Identify, prioritize, and track over time an inventory of capital real property. I think that's what we talked about in the first part of this discussion. Provide criteria for the committee to vet for select board approval new capital projects. I don't know that we're anywhere near that yet. Track the status of accepted capital projects. We discussed the big projects, and Herb talked about categorizing other ones and thinking about other ones like the maritime infrastructure, et cetera. To me, that's back to the template we have. And if we can start collecting that information, we're doing what the selectmen asked for. And then develop funding models for all new capital projects.
Options.
Yeah, I don't know. In the Pownell thing, one of the assumptions they had in their big, expansive model was that if the project cost was, I think, $250,000 and had a life of more than 5 years, it would be bonded. But that was just to drive the model, and then they had all kinds of ways to smooth out the change in the tax base or whatever, tax rate.
Is there something that selectmen expect to have go before the town meeting about us?
Well, last year, the capital, yeah, there is. What does it say? Part of the annual meeting, submit the plan to the select board for approval and present the plan to the community. So at a minimum, if we gave the community an overview of ongoing capital expenditures and what the magnitude of that is, educated them on how the reserve funds work, and then provided the template overview of all the accepted projects, and then had some conclusion as to our ability to fund these big projects, I think that would be a lot to have accomplished since we didn't get started until January.
That would
I
be a lot,
also
yeah.
think you're not, the last item you articulated, we will not be there by the town meeting. Being
Well,
able to
somewhat.
say what the total cost of all this is and how it gets funded. I mean, just realistically, there's gonna be big gaps in knowledge here, so. I just toss out one more question. Having been to several town meetings as a non-voting and sometimes not allowed to speak participant.
Always been allowed to speak, Jim. Come on.
No, there have been times when they'd said, go stand on the stage. So
Really?
anyhow, some of the detail you just described runs against the time pressure in the town meeting. Will there need to be some pre-briefings just to get some of the detail out?
Oh, no, this, last year, the capital planning ad hoc group did a presentation on a Saturday morning in the hall.
Right.
Yeah, and that's what I
Two of
envision.
us showed up.
That's what I envision this report's gonna be this
Okay,
year.
so it
Whatever
won't
it
be
is.
it won't be technically at the town meeting. It will
No.
be to the public. Okay. Just checking.
Well, is
So
there,
Herb, what's your reaction to what I said?
I think, I don't think anybody expects you to solve all the problems by town meeting. I think if you understand how things have been done in the past few years, what the thinking's been, and you bring a recommendation with some thought behind it that performs that same function. In other words, puts a table in the warrant that says, here's what we think you ought to raise for capital funding, and here's how we did it. In terms of the town meeting, in other words, don't change too much, kind of go status quo, but try and put your expertise behind the prioritization. Because the prioritization ends up being the selectmen kind of talking things over a million times about capital projects and just finally coming up. And then at the end, looking at the undesignated fund and saying, oh, we've got another $50,000 we can stick into the Stone Wharf account. That's kind of the way it's been done. If you can incrementally improve that and come up with something that, looks similar as a town warrant, you've done your job, you've incrementally improved the situation, and solving all these bigger problems and informing the people is going to be a process. It's not going to be it's not going to be a meeting, and it's going to take a long time because people aren't used to it and whatever. So I think giving a public presentation, not unlike what was done before, but maybe with a little more polish, maybe with a little more, what's the word, protocol or process or whatever behind it. I think everybody would be tremendously happy and look at this as a process that's going to unfold over the next few years, where we're trying to get this railroad train back on the tracks, or keep it on the tracks when it used to be just kind of, the tracks were kind of meandering all over the place. Not in a bad way. I mean, we've gotten things done, but I think everybody's ready for it to be more of a process, but I don't think anybody expects it to be immediate.
oh, that's good, because I was concerned, there are various things I've seen. I saw something about 60 days, in one of these documents, and then that it would be up to the select board to recommend that there become a standing finance committee, and then the town would have to vote on that, and it would have to be a town meeting. So that's, so what I agree with what we're saying is just, do our best to any vote for a standing town meeting, is that going to have to happen at some point? For
That can happen.
sorry, standing finance committee. Yeah.
That,
The ordinance that you guys are following, right now, it's their guidelines, and so
Okay.
at the end of this process, if, and I mean, Herb can speak to it, he's the one that wrote the information, but the goal was, for the ad hoc to develop, these guidelines and have a recommendation, and they did. Now you're using these guidelines that they worked on, and walking through this process. At the end of this process, the idea, more or less, is that document that is currently the finance committee guidelines would be brought to town meeting and adopted as an ordinance.
Okay.
So
okay.
that's what would be going to town meeting and being adopted.
however, levying taxes and the estimate on on how you distribute or how you raise taxes can only be done at annual town meeting. An ordinance can be adopted anytime at any meeting, any town meeting. So a special meeting could be called at any time. So in terms of priorities, in terms of what you focus on, I think just what I said before, I think these other things, if you, and it can simply say, you can spend one meeting reviewing that ordinance and say, yeah, this makes sense. And just make a recommendation that they put it in the annual town meeting if you want to. But I don't think that's a critical piece. I think that's, if you had to go a little bit further, a few months further and do it in a special town meeting because you wanted to get the numbers right, you wanted to educate people, those, how you prioritize those things, I think is probably a little bit malleable in my mind.
And I think, yeah, I agree with her, but I think the board, what they're hoping is to be able to have a group of people who are able to more thoroughly and in detail take a look at all of this information in a way that they don't have the capacity to do, because they're, in the past, have had to do this in line with just the day-to-day decision making about the municipality as a whole. And so having that information that you can provide to them that could help them guide the final numbers in terms of the reserve accounts and capital would be something that they would probably feel a lot better about and more confident about bringing to the board, knowing that there has been some solid work put into providing those numbers and having a reason behind them.
Okay, we've been going an hour and 45 minutes. Meeting minutes. Chip recorded things and translated the minutes last time through AI into a one-page summary, a two-page summary, whatever. I don't think we have a set of minutes to review today, but I think if we took the two-page summary like he presented last time and edit it for corrections and make our own additions, that would work. I don't know. What did you guys think?
Well, the one thing I was reported as having moved, I wasn't in the room at the time, so I'm a little confused.
Right, so that would be an edit.
But not me.
So how about for our next meeting, we take the first meeting's minutes, the two-page version of that Chip created, and the same for this meeting, and Chip will send them out as drafts, and we'll provide him our feedback, and we'll see if we can't have an efficient minute process that works. That okay with everybody? Do we
Yeah, and
have
I-
a meeting, do we have a meeting scheduled next Friday, or was this the last one we had
No,
on?
next Friday.
Okay. All right,
Um,
so I'd say come prepared to that meeting to talk about, or to know whether Fridays continue to work for me, but so I'd like to say, okay, we're gonna meet, continue the process, but we can talk about that next Friday, schedule the future meetings.
I
Uh,
think, and I can speak a little bit about the minutes, and I apologize if I did. We call this the ragged edge of technology. It is new technology, and I apologize I didn't explain to everybody that those were right as they came out of the horse's mouth. So they were not considered to be, for approval. And I think that, as I look at uh, various things and people and people's times that they have to commit to these type of things. I look at the town with 6 vacancies on boards and perhaps even more on, if you count the select board, trying to get people to engage. And if the time it takes to do what this technology can do, is the time it takes to really go through and thoroughly do all the verbatim minutes or go through and peruse them is hours and hours. And I just can't commit that to that level of, I do think they're important, but I think it's more important to take those hours and put it into things like creating the ways to track these assets and do that type of thing. So we can certainly, if we're making motions, they can be recorded separately. But if people take a look at them, and see if anything was missed, I think that we could gradually get this technology so it would really work well. And I think it would help people coming into, or people who might look to be joining our board, to say, okay, this is they're organized. We can do a simple 1-page minutes and that type of thing, but that doesn't create much information. And as I've experimented with the AI technology and its ability to summarize, it is not perfect in getting every motion and that type of thing, or name it, called Jim Chip or Chip, get confused with that. But the overall sense of the document, and the discussions, I think it does a pretty good job of getting that, of what was talked about. And so that gives people who may want to join us later on, if they want to review the minutes, gives them much more of a story. And in the end, a lot of this is stories. It's a little numbers and a lot of stories about all these things. So I admit to being and working in the ragged edge of technology for almost 40 years now. And it takes a lot of times it's disruptive. A lot of times it creates consternation. But in the end, I do see it as providing the continuity. Just as for instance, some of the historical work that's been done, I know her done a lot of work on the type of stuff where we're starting now, those historical documents. I've seen some of them, taken a look at some of them. It's that all that work was lost. And all that effort was lost. And I think that it helps also people to think that in this type of effort, there is a continuity. Your efforts are rewarded because your work will be preserved and passed forward. It saves time, and I think eventually encourages participation, which is encouraging participation with all the stuff. I mean, right, there's 3 big 800-pound gorillas sitting in at select board meetings that the town has to decide on. There's a lot of stuff to decide. So that's my minute of I'll get off my soapbox, but that's what I see, what it looks like. Any other comments about it or anything?
Anybody have
Shut the
anything they
place down,
want
huh?
on next agenda?
The what?
Anything you want to make sure is on next week's agenda? And I will draft one and try to get it out again by, Monday, so you guys can look at it and update it, improve it. But if you know anything right now, I'll put it on.
I think more or less reviewing what we did this session would be useful. That is, where have we advanced each of the key items?
It, and we can, if we want to adopt just creating, and we could tell us if it works better for the town to have just a one-page simple meeting minutes. The ones that I do can just be for references for members of the board. It's just a personal reference. I mean, is a one page enough, Vika, for the town to have, they want to have minutes and I don't know, what do you think?
I think that boards have struggled to provide that information in the past. And so I think any information that is able to be provided is great. The most important thing is really any decision or motions that are made is what needs to be recorded. The other stuff is just additional information. I think that if you are using a system to create them and then correcting it, I don't see a point in providing that and then doing something separate just to put on the website for the public. So I think maybe finding a happy medium somewhere in the middle. I do think that with the finance committee, if there is a little bit more information, I think it would be helpful just for the historical purposes to have it on the website and for people to be able to reference.
Okay. And are you, I see that it says YouTube, you're on YouTube. You gave us our own channel. But it is still broadcast on YouTube and the Town of Shebig like the other ones?
Yeah, so what I did is I created a specific Zoom meeting for the finance committee. But then I'm still broadcasting them on YouTube like any other meeting would be.
Okay, so I can get, okay. And last question is for with like Microsoft Word or, the 365 Excel, does the town provide for members of a board updated? How do you guys know what versions people are using? If we start creating versions of a spreadsheet, which are in whatever version, 45 of Excel or XLSX, and people are not able to open them or be backwards compatible. Is there something with the town where everybody has the same version of Excel or Word?
The short answer is no. We're just trying to become of age with the technology. And so this is the first year that the select board members have a select board account and have access to things. So I think that's the best answer I could give you is no.
That's fine. Okay.
Anything else before we adjourn? Thank you, Herb, for joining us and
Yeah, thanks. Herb.
Well, I thank all you guys for serving. It's past time to get this on the road.
okay. See you all next Friday. Thank you.
Have a great weekend.
Yeah,
Thank
you
you.
too. Bye.